Welcome to Coming from Left Field, where we have conversations about politics, books, and current events with your host, Greg Goddles and Pat Cummings. Okay, imagine you live in rural Pennsylvania. You pick up the paper and learn that your very conservative local representative is proposing that the state stop giving college financial aid to people that study poetry. What the heck? You're a creative writing professor at a nearby college with a PhD in American literature. In a hold my beer moment, you decide to run for political office and challenge the poetry banning wacko. And how did that go? Let's discuss. Well, warm greetings, everybody. Greg and I are really glad to have Matt Ferrence on, the professor at Allegheny College, creative writing, and author of the very fine book, I Hate It Here, Please Vote for Me, Essays on Rural and Political Decay. Matt, we're all kind of brothers in arms here. We all grew up in central rural parts of the country. I'm assuming we're a little bit on the left side of things. And it's interesting how your book investigates that in a pretty accurate way. Why did you decide to write this book?
Yeah, so right, I grew up in Indiana County, Pennsylvania, which I like to describe it. It's a state that is shaped, or it's a county that's shaped exactly the same way as the state. And it's former coal country. The coal mines were pretty much closed by the time I was born in the mid '70s. But I've grown up always around a certain kind of conservative political uh, control that has happened at the same time that places like my hometown and where I live now, up in northwestern Pennsylvania, the Rust Belt, where people are struggling and the poverty is really high. And folks like me who, yeah, are on the left side of stuff, believe in art, believe in the power of public investment, are considered outsiders, sometimes literally in my case, when they run for office, even if they're from there. And that was the motivation of the book. I mean, there's no surprise. I ran in a really right wing district, so I lost really poorly, which I cover very quickly in the book. But I wanted to get into that. First of all, how painful that is as a person, both personally and for your neighbors, and also trying to get at some different ways of looking at life in rural America that maybe can have some hope for the future.
And you are a creative writing professor at
Right.
Allegheny, which is one of those old land grant colleges. It's been around forever.
Yeah, there's a wonderful sign out in front of our library, and see if I get this right. We are the oldest continuously named colleges west of the Allegheny Mountains. So I think we rank in the top 40, something like that. Casey Kasem, Blast from the Past, top 40 oldest colleges in the country, founded in 1815, if memory serves. So we've been doing it here on the margin of America when it first opened for quite a long time.
And I love in the book you get right to the point. You say right at the beginning of the book you are have your local very conservative representative
Yeah.
it just comes out and says we should just not give financial aid to anybody that wants to study poetry or 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 other pre-Walmart. He calls it pre-Walmart
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
and at that point in time, you read that in the paper. You turned to the person next to you, said, "Hold my beer. I'm going to run against this
Yeah.
this fellow." Right?
Yeah. Right. That's a
That's
nice way.
exactly right. Right? I'm not exaggerating. Right?
No, you're not at all. And it was so that moment happened in 2018, and it was 2 weeks before the election, and like almost every election since he first took office in 2005, well, his first election 2005, I think. He was unopposed. And so I ran a 2-week write-in campaign because of that lack of opposition, with the promise that if I did okay, I didn't really define that. One of my friends like, "What does that mean?" That I would run in 2020, and I pulled off somewhere 1 to 2% of the vote as a write-in candidate with no budget, just spreading between friends. And so as soon as that election was over in 2018, I set to work on getting on the ballot for 2020 to put a real effort forward, because that statement. And the next thing that's really important to that, Pat, is he apologized when the statement came out, but he apologized to Walmart, uh, right? Which is, and he continued through the election, of course, because I'm a creative writing professor, to continue to critique poets, and he still does it to this day. And it's, first of all, directly insulting to what I do for a living, but also politically and conceptually, that message is that if you come from a rural place, or if you come from a background of poverty, you don't get to choose your own horizons. That's what his message is. You can't be a poet, you can't be a dreamer if you have lost in the deal that has been established in the United States. And I think we all know, and anybody who looks into it starts to realize really deeply, that the deck has been stacked against certain people, and to tell them you belong to the economy, rich people can be poets. That's why a third of the people in the city of Meadville live in poverty. So the run was both about poetry and also about what those limitations mean, which is why it made me so angry on multiple levels when I first saw that back in 2018.
Greg started his doctorate in philosophy. That's worse than poetry, isn't it?
Right. Yeah,
all the Marxists hang out in philosophy.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
That's right.
I don't know, Greg, when you read the book, isn't it interesting how much we're all kind of brothers with the same experience with growing up in rural areas?
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to take a long view of what's going on in this country in terms of these rural areas. And I grew up in, as you did, Pat, in central Illinois. But when I was a kid, that little group of towns was industrial. It was industrial right in the middle of the cornfield. So it had a particular flavor to it, and the politics had a different flavor to it than it does today. And now I go back, the coal mines were shut down in 1947. General Motors Foundry was shut in the 70s or the 80s. Lawhoffs. I mean, there's a whole slew of industrial enterprises that are all gone now. And in its place, and I think this is the story of rural America, rural industry. I mean, people have an image of rural America being cornfields. It's not. There are towns like Danville, Illinois, all through Pennsylvania, that are industrial towns. They're gone. And then they bleed into the rural areas because it's just poverty everywhere. And so I go back to central Illinois. What do I see? I see a state prison. That's one big industry. I see tattoo parlors. I see these little gambling cafes. I'm sure you can duplicate it. I know West Virginia's like that, and you can duplicate it all through the Midwest. So what does it mean politically? I mean, your Don Quixote battle intrigues me. It's great. But how do we get beyond Don Quixote, and how do we? I mean, you obviously invested in the Democratic Party to get their nomination. I can't see them as being the vehicle for change. So what do you think?
Well, no, I agree with you 100%. So there's one of the chapters centers around a moment when the then Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania showed up at our spring breakfast. And this is John Fetterman, who's now in the Senate. And so that story, and I think it's important to open up this conversation with this story, is that when he came to Crawford County, there were two Democrats who were going to be on the ballot. I was on the state House ballot. And there was a woman running for the U.S. House against not Jim Kelly, he was a quarterback, Mike Kelly, who's a pretty right-wing MAGA Republican. And Fetterman's message to the party, which was the party of rural Crawford County, was literally, you can't win here. Your job is to go out and get a couple more votes for Joe Biden. He didn't introduce himself to me, and it was very clear he wasn't interested in the politicians who were trying to get into those seats. Then I drove up the interstate, up I-79, half hour, to the Erie County spring kickoff, because I was also on the ballot in Erie County, because the district covered both counties. And there he said, back to blue, Erie County is a bellwether county. We need to elect every Democrat on this ballot. So in the town where I live, I was cannon fodder. in the town that I drove to, I was important to the Democratic Party. And I was very angry about this, obviously. And I got a little bit angry when I realized it was exactly correct strategically. And this gets to your point, Greg, is that strategically, the Democratic Party has given up on actually trying to win elections in rural places. And that meant when I was the nominee and Joe Biden became the nominee, the state party wanted me to use my volunteers to make calls for him, not me. They might be able to mention my name, but my race wasn't important to them. So I came to realize two things. One is that if you're a candidate, a Don Quixote candidate, I love that, like me, there is no point in being nice, I suppose, is the word. You see a lot of rural candidates try to appeal to the middle. You're going to lose anyway, and you're going to lose by appealing to nothing. So you need to speak clearly and firmly from those rural places because you don't have anything to lose. And that connects to the other point is I don't think politicians are going to save us because politicians and politics are designed to follow the wind. And so we need to move the wind. And it's you moving the wind of your neighbor by talking to them. It's artists, it's rural communicators and social connectors who can start to demonstrate, not in elections, but on a daily basis of how the politics that we've always had in rural spots have led to what we've always gotten. And then that's where my hope and confidence in the future happens. The politicians will follow. They just don't have to follow right now because the GOP, they get the vote instantaneously. The Democratic Party is going to try to fight elsewhere. And so I think there's a certain liberation in recognizing that you can't depend or wait on party politics to bring progressive action to rural spaces. In my little town, there is a progressive active group that has done that. They started on renters' rights is one of their main things because there's so much poverty in town. And they've actually then wound up having political influence, but they started as community organizers. But yeah, I kind of think like I probably would have done no worse, maybe better if I had run on a third party. But that's a different version of the conversation there.
I think, I think you're exactly right. And, you brought up Fetterman in the book, and that's, I was talking to Pat about just that anecdote before you came on. Why? Because I know John Fetterman. I mean, I've been in demonstrations. I know what a scoundrel he is. I know how opportunistic he is. His story is J.D. Vance's story, but on the Democratic Party side. It's exactly the same story. Braddock, Pennsylvania, rich kid comes in, buys his way in, but that's the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And people, I think, in rural America are looking for authenticity. And unfortunately, it's people like him that are killing authenticity because he went all around the state to the rural areas when he ran. When he ran for Senate, he was in your county. He was appealing to people. And the baggy, the baggy shirt and the hoodie and all that makes people think he's authentic. He isn't. He's as far from that as J.D. Vance is from authenticity.
Yeah, and one of the things when he was running for Senate that I thought was really clear, not a surprise to me also as Western Pennsylvanian, but the current mayor of Braddock, or the mayor of Braddock then, and the rep for Braddock, Summer Lee, who's now in the U.S. House, they weren't backing him. And so when you've got, the Black women who are part of that community and are politically active aren't actually in the corner of the famous savior of Braddock, Pennsylvania, I think it tells you something about brand. And it pains me to say you're absolutely right that there isn't really a fundamental difference between his fashioning of himself as a rural progressive. He's not a progressive at all, really. I mean, he has now said that publicly. And J.D. Vance, who's not really an Appalachian or Appalachian-minded conservative candidate. And so it's those, it's one of the other things I talk about, why I think poetry is so important, is everyone says they vote for issues, and they don't. They vote for stories. And so Vance gives people a convenient story, Fetterman gives people a convenient story, and we have to start disrupting those so that we can actually get into something else and recognize, hey, man, the story's great, but the poverty keeps getting worse. What's the point?
I'd like to back up a little bit. You
Yeah.
and talk about your book.
Oh, yeah.
When I first started to read, I thought, I don't know if this is going to be good. I don't know. And by the time I was done, I thought I called Greg. I said, we have got to get this guy on. This is a well written book because you're a creative writing professor. So you would expect
Right. I hope.
it to be a good book. So it starts with in the first, chapter, first pages, you decided to run, and here is the results, Ballotpedia, and you got your butt kicked by this guy,
It did.
20,000 to 12,000 votes, so
Right.
65 to 35. So that's not even close. And the chapters are a way of you processing this, not in like woe is me, but truly trying to understand what is the situation when you got 12,000 people that said I'm on your side.
Right.
and
Right.
and when Greg and I go back to our rural roots, we hang out with people that we love and care about, and they're just like right on the money.
Yeah.
So it's not like I think that's the saddest part about this whole thing, is that there's no representation for people that are good people, good values. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, it's this kind of invisible disenfranchisement. So every House district in Pennsylvania has 66,000, give or take, residents, and 12,000 people voted for me in my election, and that is a big fat zero when it comes to the map. It's just a hard red map, and so the way we usually see the politics covered are it's a MAGA county or a MAGA district, and it completely ignores all of the people that are not that. And so that was really what I was trying to get at. And part of it, I mean, woe is me isn't. Yeah, I appreciate that you say it's not that. It's the pain is real
Right.
because it's this notion. I think for all 12,000 of those people, and some of the 20,000 who aren't really paying attention, that this is where they are from, but it doesn't represent their beliefs in the world. And um, so, this is a way to answer your question a little bit. I think about, what material action could change this, because, as much as I love poetry and believe poetry does have material effect, I don't think like dropping poetry out of airplanes into rural areas is going to change what happens at the ballot box. But I think what could is, instead of very wealthy people dropping huge sums of money to build up the coffers of another famous national Democratic politician, buy some newspapers. Buy some newspapers in rural America where there actually isn't political coverage. So I was a newspaper writer for a couple of years at a small paper, and at the time we were kind of in the pocket of the car dealers. That's who had the ads. Now, if they're in the pocket of I don't even know what, because it's usually some sort of chain. So if you actually just funded small town journalism, not in even a partisan way, just like hire real journalists to cover local races, to cover state races, to cover the issues that actually affect the people, there'd be a fighting chance to communicate how the empty identity politics of Washington partisanship are not doing anything for your neighbors. And so I think, that's like you go home and you talk to those folks. Yeah, they're there. And I think there are other people who just pull the lever for the Republicans that are frustrated with the nothing they get also. They just don't believe there's any other choice. And I think that it's there. It just needs to be communicated.
We had Les Leopold on, who I just love him. He wrote a book on Wall Street and massive layoffs and stock buybacks. But one of the things that he said in his book that was most profound is that he started the book with this huge survey of people in rural America. And we think of people in rural America, some people think,
Yeah.
uh, as kind of deplorable. What's that? Rural rage,
Right.
xenophobia, all just, that they're just striking back because they're angry and they've been kicked around. He started with this survey that said actually people in rural America are more tolerant than a lot of people on the coastal elites.
Interesting.
Give you a survey of two things that he said. For example, they asked rural Americans, "Do you believe that gay couples should be able to adopt?" And in 2000, it was 38%. Now it's 76%. Three-quarters of the percent of people
Yeah.
think, yeah,
Yeah.
much more so than on the coast. And then they ask, do you think there should be a path of immigration? And I forget how it was said. If you've lived here at least 3 years, you have no felony convictions, you're employed, should you be able to get a path to citizenship? 2000, it was 32%. It doubled. It's 62%.
Yeah.
So there's the weirdest thing about rural America. Who's the new guy that's running for vice president?
Yeah, Tim.
Walz. And he's going, just mind your own goddamn business.
Yeah.
That's part of rural America. Just I'll stay out of your business, you stay out of my business. But somehow there is this co-option that has
Yeah.
occurred where they've latched on to these, I don't know, Thomas Frank's opinions of our policies that hurt them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm rambling.
No, no, but
what do you think?
I'm first of all, I'm grateful to have those figures from actual research that's done, because my impression has always been, and this is something that's vexed me, is that on the individual level, it's true what almost everybody in where I've lived in rural America is telling the truth when they say, I don't care what a person's sexuality is, I don't care their racial background. That's actually true on a one-to-one almost all the time. There are assholes everywhere, right? You can't avoid that. But then from a policy level, the votes don't follow that. And I think I like that you mentioned Thomas Frank, because that's the What's the Matter with Kansas from back, was that the 90s? Wasn't even the 2000s yet, I
Yeah,
think.
way back.
And so it sought to understand these weirdos, the rural voter. That's, I'm talking about myself as a weirdo, but it's doing it from the outside. And as a lit person, I'll think about, I've done a lot of work in Appalachian literature and image construction. There have always been stories from outside journalists and outside writers who come in to Appalachia to tell narratives about what they found, but there's always an interest at hand. And, in Appalachia, it's extraction. At first, it was religious proselytizing, and later it's, of course, timber and coal and gas. And I think one of the things I write about and think about a lot is that one of the consequences of the maps is that rural Americans wind up being blamed for Donald Trump. And I want to be clear, rural America has voted much more overwhelmingly for Trump than not, but the margins of victory for him are actually coming not out of rural America, it's coming out of the suburbs. And so there's a lot of people in the suburbs who absolutely know what they're doing. And they are happy to sign on to it because it's financially beneficial, but they've got the cover to blame the rednecks and blame the hillbillies. And so I really believe a lot of it is that storytelling. That's the problem of J.D. Vance, too, is that he became famous as a writer not from fellow conservatives. It was liberal America bought that book up because it confirmed to them what they thought was already true about people in the mountains. So they were absolved of their guilt of not having helped. The Kentucky novelist Silas House writes in, I think it's in Clay's Quilt, that the character saying when he was a kid, he was told there was a war on poverty in the hills, but he never heard the gunshots. And that's that idea that there's been a long claim that something would be done, but a long lack of inaction. And that creates that toxic stew. People are still making terrible votes. I mean, I never want to move away from that. But those narratives make it so much harder for someone, as soon as I started running for office, I was Stalin. Like literally, that was one of the many insults that came my way. And it's maddening. And that's all storytelling.
If it makes you feel any better. Greg's a Stalinist, so some of my I love that when Gerald Horn was on. We had Gerald Horn on. It was just wonderful, and he was on C-SPAN being interviewed, and he said they said are you a communist? And he said some of my absolute best friends are communists. That was his response. Because I think if he really said, "Yeah, I'm a communist," he'd never, he'd never get another grant in university ever. But
well, let me
that's always going to be there. That's always going to be there, but that's not really decisive. My politics, I'm open about my far left politics, my being a communist and so forth, but it's never a decisive factor with people. I mean, people will accept you if they know you.
Right.
I might have had people in the last 30, 40 years I've ran into, and they'll say to me, sotto voce, they'll say, for a communist, you're a pretty nice guy. and they're friends, I mean, so it's, they don't know. And it's a national religion. Racism and anti-communism are the national religion. So I got no problem with it. But I think the challenge, and I'll ask you this, Matt. Challenge is, what do the folks that we know and love in rural America and think that are really nice people, and you trust them with you leave your door unlocked at night, you trust them with your life. Where were they supposed to go if they didn't go for Trump? If they were fed up with the way things were going, if they felt they're being screwed, if they felt they saw industry leave, and they're told, like even in Pittsburgh, in a metro area, the mayor says, "Hey, industry's gone. If you don't like it, leave." That's the kind of answer they got from Democrats. What should they do? What else can they do but vote for Trump? I mean, that's one way to look at it.
No, and I agree with you 100%. And that some of it, what I tell people personally, I don't think I wrote about this in the book, but some of it is like that. I know I'm getting nothing. I know I'm getting nothing from Trump, and I know I'm getting nothing from the Democrats. But the Democrats actually are meaner in their stereotypes of rural America. So Trump is a great middle finger. And that's why I really think, I think we're among friends, so I can say this, right? Like, that's where independent and third party in rural spaces is, that's the movement I'd love to see. Because, there's a strategic, realistic thing to be said. Because, I'm going to say a Democrat in this climate is better to elect than a Republican in almost every situation, certainly at the national level. And so I understand people getting a little bit uneasy of leftish votes being pulled away from Democrats in big elections. But in a place like Crawford County and across rural America, where the Democrats aren't going to win anyway, that's the place for third party and or independents to start building this coalition. And if I were going to do one thing differently in my campaign, and think that maybe it would have made a difference in winning, unless I was going to cosplay as a right-wing Republican, maybe that would have worked. I couldn't have pulled it off. It would have been to run as an independent, because it would have disrupted the automatic negative response from Republicans of, he's a Democrat, I can't vote for a Democrat, and might have actually given enough of a crack to start talking about the issues they need. I write about going to a Farm Bureau meeting, and the Farm Bureau, I think the history of the Grange, the history of communal communist action, essentially among farmers throughout the history of American farming. At that breakfast, the farmers are asking for public investment in broadband. They're asking for price controls on milk because they can't make a living, and they're not getting that. And they're not getting that from the people they're voting for, but they're not going to vote for a Democrat. The Republicans at that luncheon were very clear they weren't going to offer what the Farm Bureau was asking for. That's that crack for a more liberal, practical, consolidated power to come out of rural spaces. I'll add on to that Canada, one of my favorite other countries, and the small province of Prince Edward Island. The Green Party was actually able to become the official opposition for one of their legislative sessions in the parliament because of the scale And because they created a coalition of farmers and environmentalists, recognizing that they're not automatically antagonistic, and they kicked the liberals out of the number 2 spot. And that shows the possibility, and politics are different in Canada, obviously, in the United States, but that's the sort of coalition building that can come out of rural spaces, where you know your neighbors a little bit more, that I think could transform stuff. And then rural America can lead the national conversation in a way it never does. That said, I have a little bit of hope with Tim Walz on the ticket. We'll see, but yeah, I'd love for a revolution from the prairies.
Yeah, and you mentioned toxic moderation. You know,
Yeah.
that problem of the Democratic politician that just basically blows smoke up your skirt
Yeah.
or whatever. You know.
Well, the one for that like drove me crazy. One of the elections was essentially a candidate was saying, "Oh, the books they want to ban, they shouldn't ban those." With the implication being banning books, we can all agree some books should be banned. I'm like, that's toxic moderation. If we're gonna grant that and just say don't ban those, but no, like just don't ban books.
I don't know, Greg. What do you think? I mean, the problem with the rural part of governance is a problem with a lot, you know, with it's everywhere. We're just not being represented, that there's the correlation between money and what actually gets done is beyond reproach. So many people are disenfranchised. They don't even vote, which is just fine for, you know, fine for everybody.
Oh yeah.
Fine from all the politicians. What unions? Is there? I don't know. What's the solution?
Yeah, I think it starts with working people. I mean, that's where it's got to begin, and it's got to go. I mean, it should go initially through unions, even though they represent a small part of the working class today. So, I mean, I'm hopeful that change in union leadership, whether it's produced out of necessity because they feel the pressure, or whether it's people that are ideologically driven to change, are welcome. And I think that's where things will begin. I think, you know, O'Brien is being attacked because he spoke at the Republican National Convention. And I don't think much of O'Brien. I mean, I don't think much of him, just in general. But on the other hand, he's doing something that serious union leaders should do, and that is hold off an endorsement until you get something.
Yeah.
The Democrats have got a free ride from the unions for I don't know how long as I can remember. African Americans, they're taken for granted. So I think the people that represent the core of the Democratic Party, not that I think the Democratic Party has any hope, but at least this is a beginning, they should never give away their endorsements unless they get something concrete in return for that. So that's a beginning. That would be a beginning. If they didn't get anything from the Democratic Party, I was at the founding convention, I have it right here, of the Labor Party in 1996. A bunch of unions, UE and a bunch of others got together and they were determined to start a Labor Party. That could push labor into something independent. But the key is, as Matt say, it's independence. Sounds like a simple concept, but independence, whether it's a third party, whether it's you running under your own name, forget the Democrats. We'll only get somewhere if we develop, evolve, and enrich an independent political action. That I think is the key.
Yeah, and there's these small things that could be done that aren't going to get us there quickly, but would start change. One of them is in Pennsylvania. We are one of the relatively few states that still has closed primaries, and so you know if you're an independent, you don't even get to vote in a primary, and so that like pushes the candidates into safety or into the extremes. And so opening primaries, you know, this could be if we can get momentum for something like that. Like at the national level of making sure primaries are open. Redistricting, we're seeing in Pennsylvania, we saw the change of that with redistricting. It changed the composition of our state house. And then the other, and obviously politicians from the two major parties don't want to do any of these things because it makes it harder for them to win elections. The other is getting rid of first past the poll voting. You know, and the studies have been really clear that if you do ranked choice voting, suddenly you can't get away with not paying attention to certain constituencies. And, you know, this these are not radical changes. These are what would be euphemized as common sense changes. But if and a lot of Americans would get behind this very quickly. If that can become a momentum, we can start to see the lowered stature of the two parties, which do not, neither of them represents the largest swath of people in the United States, right? Like there are more people who are not Republican and not Democrat, and that gets washed away in the coverage. There's a lot of people that are like, okay, I'll vote for one of these two, I guess.
You know, that's kind of what I like about Waltz with his comment of just mind your own damn business.
Yeah,
And you know, that could be a hat that would be worn by a lot of people from different political persuasions. And it reminds me, you mentioned Wendell Berry. There's a period of time Wendell Berry was just like, I had all of his books, and we'd sit around and have Wendell Berry readings and crap like that. But no, we wouldn't. But I love Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry's
yeah,
very nice, very good. But he said, do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you.
yeah,
That's pretty simple. But tell me if
yeah.
that's Democrat or Republican. That's
Right.
basically, you know, that those are the common, I guess, themes that could maybe break through some of this. But
What does that mean, Pat? Explain that to me. What does that mean?
oh, it's like the Supreme Court lawsuit that where the chicken farmers were, you know, having all their crap go downstream. The state below them was suing them, saying you can't be doing that. It's the idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto to you. You know that you can't. Um, in this case, it was kind of an externality of the economic realm, but that's how I see it. But it's just it's just do what you would want other people to do to you. Simple as that. So
And a recognition that everybody lives in an ecosystem of connection, and it doesn't even have to be eco, but that there is no such thing as isolationism. Because even if you say I'm just doing that on my property, there is going to be something that moves to the next property from that, and I think that's inherent in Barry for sure.
I want hit another concept going
Yeah.
back to poetry. You know, some of our best friends are poets. Greg and we've had 3 or 4 poets on our show. And we had on 2 college professors from Wisconsin. One of them, John Shelton, both wrote about the myth of human capital and education, but they mentioned the Wisconsin method. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with the Wisconsin method?
I'm
I totally was not familiar with it.
Yeah.
Wisconsin method was that it was originated a philosophy in the earliest 20th century that universities have an obligation to help improve the quality of life, help improve education, help improve the environment. In other words, when you go to a university and study, you're not just studying to learn how to code and learning how to do a spreadsheet. That the university's obligation is not just employment, the university's obligation is this broader sense of helping all of the citizens of the state, not just to have you be trained for a job in, you know,
Yeah.
your slave labor or whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it, And I thought that was kind of, that's what I saw when I first read your first couple pages of your book, The Wisconsin Method. I thought, Jesus Christ, there's so much that goes on in a university that is powerful and helpful: art, um, literature, philosophy. Um,
Yeah.
it just pissed me off that that they would attack that. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know. So
Well,
that's my thought.
and the whole idea that colleges and universities exist, and the United States has had an amazing run of the egalitarian nature of it. So many more Americans go to college and university, or have the capacity to, than in other countries. Our percentage of students is so high. We have so many more rural colleges and universities that are central to the civic life of small towns. That's actually a really cool American thing. But like part of the design of these institutions is that we get to do stuff whether it's popular or not, because it might become important down the road. And what I think, from understanding that Wisconsin ethos right, what's terrifying is that Wisconsin politics used that to decide that what the only interest of the state was economic development. And I think it is Wisconsin right now is starting to like shed departments and faculty because it's not serving the bottom line. That might not be Wisconsin.
No, you're right. It was
Yeah.
Scott Walker started
Yes.
that by
Yeah.
saying we shouldn't have any college degrees in anything that doesn't relate to people being employed in our
Yeah.
little capitalist, system. And then he got some.
And
He then said I was misquoted. He wasn't misquoted. He got some shit from it.
yeah.
But and that's
That's
where that kind of triggered. But that it's not just
yeah.
Wisconsin. It's everywhere.
Right. Well, that's the pre-Walmart poetry thing that we started the conversation with. They start the book with. It's the same thing. And so, what's hard about all of this is that we live in this soup, this atmospheric soup of, some people just call it neoliberalism and call it a day, and that might be good, where everything is always being defined in the dollars and cents that it's going to contribute to a profit-making economy. And as soon as you start doing that, the good of humanity is not profitable. It isn't. You can make a lot more money harming humanity than you can doing unpopular things that are actually good for our continuation. And so that's where Aldo Leopold, another fantastic Wisconsinite, comes to mind. And his concept, as a conservative, he was a mid-century conservative, of the land ethic. And his argument was that all we ever do when we look at landscapes is, and I'm paraphrasing, think about its dollar value. We don't think about the land itself as having a right to exist, and that we should be making our decisions based on the biotic community, the quality of the soil, the quality of the critters in the soil. It's a pretty radical 1950s idea that is conversant with the Wisconsin ideal. It's conversant with Wendell Berry and the politics of restoration that I like, of we have to start looking at every part of our community and trying to make decisions not about what the 65% want, but about what lifts us all up together. And those are philosophical changes, not political changes, which is why the philosophers are actually important. That makes the answers a lot harder, unfortunately. But part of finding an answer is adequately diagnosing the problem. And we keep being pushed to not think in these deep ways. Everything's a soundbite. Everything is a political slogan. And that's why we can't get to the underlying considerations of who we are.
Greg, do you think we have any hope at all that what Matt is trying to do is going to happen? I mean, you got Donald Trump running. You got somehow we end up with Kamala Harris. I'm sorry, I'm not a huge fan. The political parties have failed us. I don't know.
I'll go out on a limb, Pat, and you can mark this down.
All right.
Predict that she's going to win the nomination of the Democratic Party for president, and this guy from Minnesota, this mayor, he's going to win the vice presidential nomination. That's my prediction. And I predicted the Republican convention as well. So I'm 1 for 1, and I'm going to be 2 for 2.
Yeah.
What does it tell you about democracy? What does it tell you about democracy? What does it tell you about democracy? Convention is where you go and you nominate and you argue and fuss and choose. And it's been chosen by probably 5 people. I think it's
no ability to have third parties be reasonable. It's getting worse rather than better.
Well, it's money. Suppose, I mean, they don't even want you. I worked for the Green Party for 6 years. I gathered signatures. They don't even want you to get on the ballot, knowing full well that the preponderance of money that they have will keep you from winning anyway. They're just afraid that you might knock a little margin off of theirs. They don't really think you're going to win. But in Pennsylvania, as you well know, Matt, the Democratic Party spent untold, I think, $1 million or more on keeping the Green Party off the ballot. They hired Reed Smith, Shaw McClay. If you know Pittsburgh, you know that's the biggest law firm, biggest
Yeah.
union law firm, to do their work, and they come at a big price. So I mean, I think that the promise goes back to what Matt said earlier about movements, political movements, and it's great to hear in Meadville there are political movements. There are political
Yeah.
movements here. The question is,
Yeah.
how do we get beyond that? How do we get further on? It just doesn't die out when the issue goes away.
Hmm.
No, yeah. Well, and like these little tidbits that I'm going to take as hope is when I got my small percentage as a write-in, I was a member of the Green Party. The flip side of that was, of course, I registered back in the Democratic Party for the campaign because I knew if I wanted a chance to win, I had to do that. But those are those little blips. And in Meadville, the progressive organization that actually is in complete control of the city council right now are all members of the Democratic Party, but are hated by the old Democratic Party guard here because they recognized again they needed party affiliation to to move forward, but they're actually affiliated with PA United out of Pittsburgh, so they have a branch out of PA United, which isn't a party, but it's a political action group. And so that's again where I see the small towns and the rural places offering some capacity for change, because in a town of 12,000, you can mobilize, and they did. They're very good at it, and you can win elections. Moving not in lockstep with the party mover and shakers. And what we've seen now is that the county party is friendly again with our mayor and the members of city council who are from this progressive side, because it's a recognition like, well, they're winning the elections. And if that continues, I mean, there's a lot of resistance to it, but if that continues, that's what you can start to see increment positive change. Increment doesn't get you very far very fast, unfortunately, and we need something much more quickly. If I want to be super optimistic, if we can get the Trump thing down and out, that may reopen some space for critique of the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party may be wounded so much by what's happened in the MAGA years that we can actually get a broader coalition. What I see with my students and young people is they are really tired of this stuff, and there's hope there that they're not like, they see that all the deals of just play nice and do what's been done before, that means they don't have any capacity to own homes and expect to ever retire or any of that. And so the next generation coming forward, I think, is not going to be patient with receiving scraps of kind of an old boomer economics that doesn't apply anymore.
Yeah, and that remarkable enthusiasm we've seen the last 3 weeks since Biden stepped down, that came out of nowhere. I don't know.
Yeah.
I did not see that coming at all.
And I think that is a flicker of the millennials and maybe even more the Gen Zers of sort of recognizing, okay, like we actually have moved on from the very old guard, even though Harris does represent straightforward, like has been central to the party, but it is a sea change that I kind of see Harris and Walz following and recognizing that's their pathway forward. It's not old Democratic Party. They'll keep losing elections that way.
No.
I think you're imbued with unjustifiable hope and enthusiasm, because if you know the history of, I'm sure you do, some of the history of Kamala, it's not there. I mean, she ran for president and she was for single payer. Oh, I'm for single payer, until she wasn't, which was just a matter of weeks. And you find out all through her career. And of course, we should have learned by now that what people say in September, October, November is not what they're going to do. And Obama should have taught everybody that, because he ran on a program and it all went away. He had the last Democratic supermajority. He had the House, he had the Senate for 2 years, and the presidency. Promised labor everything. He promised everybody everything in the coalition, and produced nothing but the ACA, which is really a disaster. I mean, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, because it's got so many holes in the barrel. I mean, it's just leaking all over the place. Medicare is, I'm on Medicare. I know what you pay. I pay more supplemental being on Medicare than I did when I didn't have Medicare.
Yeah.
But everyone
Well,
knows these things. They have no one fighting for them.
my dark optimism of that is that I now believe more than ever, having run for office, that there is almost no politician anywhere who actually has a stable ethics uh, of governance, and like it's just
Integrity,
that's yeah.
integrity.
No, all right, or their integrity is such that they exist to follow what the people seem to what will win elections, and that's where my hope's not in the politician. My hope's in what people are willing to accept. And when you have politicians who are just purely political animals, in that sense, they're gonna go for something good if they're gonna lose election if they don't. It's not that Harris necessarily would be pushing for it, but if you know you're going to lose an election, that's my dark optimism. Yeah. That once you give up on the integrity of politicians, then you can reinvest in the integrity of people.
Hey, when you're grading papers at night and you're sitting in your living room, what sax jazz sax players do you like to listen to?
Oh yeah, so there's a few favorites. Probably my favorite jazz saxophone player of the old guard. Well, there's two, but I'm gonna go with Frank Morgan. Frank Morgan just also, it's an amazing story because Frank in the mid 50s was one of the up and comer second generation beboppers, and then he spent most of his life in prison because of heroin addiction. Got out of prison when he was about 50 years old and reignited his career, and just has from the 1980s and through the early 90s amazing soulful music. So Frank Morgan's a big one. And then I've been getting into Nordic European jazz lately also.
Like
right,
what?
I know. I apologize to everybody listening. And there's a
Jan Gabarek. Jan Gabarek.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, his work very well. Hasta Siempre. That's one of my favorite tunes he does. And
well, Jan Gabarek. There's this young Dutch saxophone player named Kika, Kika Sprangers, who just has these gorgeous kind of chamber jazz albums, and one of them is a quintet with a vocalist, not singing words but just singing tones, called Anna Cerise, or her name's Anna Cerise, and it's just this gorgeous kind of third wave jazz stuff. So I'm gonna go with a combination of Frank Morgan and Kika Sprangers.
I'm going with Gerald Albright. I love him. He just goes. One of the very first essays that I've ever read from Greg was, I think he did an essay on Coltrane or something. That was you were a big old and I mentioned this because you play saxophone, right?
Yes.
And do you play it like every weekend or just whenever you can?
Well, so I have a little trio, and we have a monthly standing gig, and then other jobs we can get. We play in a place here in town, and we play a variation of original compositions and stuff people actually want to hear.
Well, my wife.
That's what got 12,000 votes.
Exactly right.
My wife is a drummer, so I good part of my life is hauling around drum kits all over the hell and back. So good.
It keeps you fit.
Yeah, good. Matt, hey, this has been fun. This has been fun. We should next time we should do this on a front porch somewhere in the Midwest.
Yeah,
so
that'd be fun.
This is good. You have another book in the offering?
I've got some old books. My previous book, which is a nice comparison to that, or complement, is called Appalachian North. And it's a memoir about what it means to grow up north of the Mason-Dixon line and then figure out you're actually Appalachian. That plus, how do you live your life after you've had a brain tumor diagnosis and surgery and radiation? So it's kind of like a different kind of recovery memoir. So that's the pairing. And then I have got New Secret, maybe a jazz-based book that I'm working on, but everything's a little too soon to know what I'm doing yet.
Good. Well, you are, like I said, you are a good writer. I would expect you to be a good writer. Jesus Christ. I mean, you're a good writer, and it's just so nice to read a book where you're just going, okay, I like this turn of phrase. This is well done.
Good conversationalist as well.
So thank you.
To your discussion.
Hey, keep at it. Keep at it. I hope you have another hold my beer moment in the future too. So don't get downhearted. You did a good deal.
Thank you.
Bye.
Appreciate the time, guys.